Okay.
All right, so it's 6:30 on March 27th. We're gonna go ahead and start the work session. I'll turn it over to our city manager, Ms. Sanchez.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So the chief and I tried to create some flip notes to help because this is obviously a large document. And so that's probably what we're gonna be working off is the clip notes. I do want to share as well, when we entered into like what we thought this study was going to be about and kind of what we got out of it, I'm not sure they're exactly the same. I was expecting more details, more evaluations. If they're recommending one thing, what are the costs going to be? What are the steps that are needed? And there really just isn't as much meat as what I would have hoped for, type of thing. So it is kind of a little disappointing from that perspective. I did go back to the scope of work that they're contractually obligated to see if there was, you didn't meet these areas to try to get more. And unfortunately, it was written, and we all reviewed it, but it was written just kind of broadly to where there wasn't enough for me to really force a lot more. So I do want to say that. The other you'll notice here at the top from a disclaimer perspective is the chief is still going to need to process this study with the volunteers and get feedback and input and all of that kind of stuff. So I want to make sure we're clear going into that. So kind of starting out, the first 10 to 20 pages, like talk about like what state standards are, best practice, like, so again, nothing relevant to our department type of thing. So that's a lot of the big part of it. To explain what the structure is, just in case everybody doesn't fully understand it. So we have the Alamosa County Fire Protection District, and they collect a mill levy. It's a 5-member elected board, so a separate legal entity. And they collect a mill levy in the unincorporated areas of Alamosa County. And that pays for fire services in the unincorporated areas of Alamosa County. Then for us, we also have our fire department, which you guys know, then we got a budget and pay bill, we pay volunteers for when they respond here. And then Bill also reports though to the Alamosa County Fire Protection District as it relates to the calls we respond to out in the county. So it creates this kind of weird dynamic where Bill's having to report to me as the city manager for calls and the services within city limits. And then he's reporting to this board for those calls that are out in the county. And essentially is it, what is it south of that we respond to?
South of the
Stanley Road type of thing. So that's the agreement. It's been that way for longer than I know, very, very long time.
And how far south do you go? All the way to the county. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's kind of the structure. And then the next bullet I already hit on, you know, that the chief reports to 2 site supervisors. Sometimes there can be different expectations for service of what we're expecting from a city perspective versus what the board might be expecting. There might be differences in the type of documentation they want versus the documentation we want, because it's just 2 different governing boards type of thing. The other issue that's identified in the study is there's really not a written strategic or master plan that's kind of guiding the relationship. And so what we're running into is, you know, we have a board that has a very long history. There's been bumps in the relationship between the city and this board, and that's still there. There's reasons decisions were made that we don't know why they were made, but it's the decisions we're going off of. But yet we haven't had a really good discussion to say, are we even on the same page? Where do we want to be? What is our vision? That kind of stuff. And when you don't have that, and when you have different ways of operating, it can naturally start leading to some just grumpiness and things not functioning as well as it could. You know, from an operational perspective, you know, I know for Bill, him and I do a lot through email. Like that is how we connect a lot. We still meet, but we do a lot of things through email. The board does not. They do not do things through email. And that was a hard lesson to learn. You know, Bill, being new, sent them a draft request for proposals to get their input. He didn't hear anything, so he went ahead and issued it. And come to find out, they're like, no, we don't review stuff outside. We don't do things through email. You needed to wait for us to tell you during a meeting type of thing. So when I say there's differences, there's a lot of differences, and neither one is good or bad type of thing. So anyways, so when you don't have master plans, or you don't have things like that, it's not the best thing. Throughout it talks about needing to really be intentional to improve our communication and really look at maybe updating our agreements and our written understandings and things like that to have clear expectations. And so that's filtered throughout the whole thing. The next bullet is the county does not have a formal or informal strategic or capital purchasing plans in place. Given the nature of the fire protection services, the projected $775,000 fund balance that they have may not be substantial enough of a cushion if they need to do a major purchase of apparatus or other type of expenditure. So just an FYI, I spent time on that. It also identified it in several different ways, the difference in response to medical calls. So when they're within our response area, the ambulance can get there in a fairly timely manner. So we do not respond to medical calls unless the ambulance calls us to do that, if they need an extrication or, you know, whatever else they might need. But we're not a first response to medical calls. The Moscow Hoover area, being further away, have found it that it's important for them to be responding right away from a medical perspective. So that is presented this way in a few different ways. In that one, you've got individuals in the county paying a mill levy, and one part is getting a different level of service versus the other type of thing. And is there an inequity there? It's just raised as a question. The other way it's also showing up is there could be liability issues if your fire department's responding as a first response to medical and they're not trained as EMTs. Because if you move someone incorrectly, trying to do life-saving support, those types of things. And so there could be potential medical liability issues as it relates to that. So the document does talk about that. It was supposed to evaluate the call volume. This is the part I was really have my hopes for, is they were supposed to evaluate the call volume, what our staffing levels are, and if we need to start seriously entertaining maybe a hybrid type of department type of thing. I don't feel like they did a good job on that at all type of thing. So
some say it may not be because this is what we're expecting.
I looked at the wording.
No, but I mean, you just ask them and say, hey, I don't know, I'm just asking. All I can say is no.
So what they said is, and if you look on page like 23 and 24, is they did look at our call volume. But they feel like since it's not tracked in different ways, that it is hard to make a strong determination of it type of thing. And they feel like our volume hasn't gone up type of situation. But what I can tell you from, go ahead,
Yes, if I could interject, they were using an old set of stats and not looking too closely at them. For instance, in 2021, I think it was like maybe 370 calls, but 70 of those calls were standby for the airport. And so if you reduce those, they would have a natural average of what Alamos City Fire Department is going to from 22 and 23. So they were incorporating calls that we no longer go on, and that's just a standby at the airport, which is different than motor vehicle accidents with extrication or a grass fire or a structure fire. Any of the other things we go on other than standby. So we did talk to them about updating that, and I don't believe it got in the final one to reflect the actual gradient increase of the calls per year. Because with that high average in 21, it almost looks kind of flat. This past year we had 539. The year before we had 478, and the year before it was like, 3 something, so it went up substantially. But if you add that 70 extra calls, then it was kind of flat. So the gathering of information wasn't as concise as we would want.
So if you look at page 23, you can see where they're looking kind of at the call volume, factor in everything that Bill just told you. But the other interesting part, the difference between the two entities is the call volume as well, where the Mosca Hoover is maybe 1 every few days, and we've got 1 or 2 every single day type of situation as well. So the ability to use volunteers and the impact on volunteer time is different between the two departments, type of thing. So you can look at page 23, and then like 24 is looking at average monthly calls. Like when we get the calls, it is really within that 8 to 5 that we're feeling a lot of compression type of situation.
Keep referencing pages 23 and 24 and
25.
Oh, yeah, I didn't bring, okay, sorry. I was looking here and I should have printed them out. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I will send those. to
Has
you
that been
guys.
sent to us in an email? Or what?
Yeah.
You mind if we access it to our phone right now?
Sure.
Okay, man.
Yeah,
And do you have it easily accessible where you could find it quickly and share it or not? If not, do we have it? Oh, you all have enough?
Well, didn't you, that's what you sent us, right?
Ready to find
Okay.
X out of this, it's gone for an hour.
And I'm sorry, guys, I should have, if I was gonna be referring to pages, I should have printed them out. I'm sorry. So you'll see on the bullet that I give is, we need to remove the calls for the airport to evaluate the trends. Our call volume is heaviest during 8 to 5 type of situation.
Honestly, yeah, the challenge with that is that we're a volunteer organization and most of the people work days. And so that becomes a challenge with that many volunteers working day shift. We only have a couple people who work some nighttime jobs. So because of the heavier volume during that time of day, that creates some challenges.
So it talks about, we need to evaluate how we capture our response time as well, because that's another thing that can factor into if you want to look at becoming a kind of a hybrid is where are our response times? And CSP is focused as a law enforcement type call, so they don't always have all the details we would need really to take a look at that. Is that correct?
Yes, the Colorado State Patrol Dispatch Center, they cover 54 entities throughout southwest, south central Colorado. So they do a great job, but quite often they're understaffed. They aren't always able to capture or deliver what we need maybe in the fashion that we would like, or like updates as we're going to a call. So once again, they are really busy with that many folks, and that's a challenge that everybody who is under that umbrella has to deal with as well.
Heather, you mentioned hybrid twice already. What does that mean?
So right now, our only paid position is the chief. Everyone else is volunteer. A hybrid would be where maybe we decide to have 5 to 10 paid to cover some of the day part of it, and then we supplement the response with volunteers type of thing.
Yeah, it's called hybrid or combination department. Combination, so typically the graduation is volunteer, combination, and full-time staff. So the natural progression based on run volume and the ability to have a dependable stable of firefighters at a particular call, when that starts waning, as it is not only in Alamosa, but across the country, volunteer firefighters, municipalities, little small towns, everybody is really struggling with the challenge of recruiting and retaining firefighters. So as we get to that point from volunteer 100%, then we graduate to a combination where you have X amount of people in certain positions, and then you backfill with volunteers. So it's very common.
But what I'm trying to be very clear on though is the analysis they did and what they said versus we really do feel like call volume's gone up and we really are feeling the compression from a volunteer perspective. So while they think it might, I don't want you just to get staff side of it. I want to make sure you know also what the consultant found as well.
Well, that seems like they have stats. The mill levy tax, so does that pay, is that paying our, what happens here in the city as well?
No, that's, we respond with county vehicles, which are housed in our stations. We respond to the county, and so we get paid per call from the county. So that's where some of that mill comes in. And also the equipment that we maintain at our city shops. The mill levy pays for the maintenance of the equipment or purchasing of equipment that is county owned, of which we have a lot in each of the 2 stations that we have.
And then sometimes we jointly purchase something type of thing as well.
Do we use the county stuff, or is it necessary to use it when we do city calls?
When I first came here, I was looking at all the apparatus, and some said city and some said county, and I had the same questions. If we've got something really big and we need a lot of extra water, then we might pull a county tender, so we have water for a particular situation. But the tough part of this is being a firefighter is you have to decide quite often, is this a city call or county call? That means I take this rig because we don't want to put a bunch of miles on their rigs because that's not right. And we don't want to put all the miles on. So it's a choice, and it's a choice that is unique to having 2 different entities in a house.
Well, and it builds up to where they recommend different scenarios. So, okay.
So be right.
Well, not. Type of
All right, I'll let you.
situation. They did some comparable departments. I didn't find that information, that section to be very helpful. The facility review does note that the facilities are accurate, or I mean adequate. The review, so this is a little bit about what Bill started to get into. The review of the apparatus, they know that there's significant duplication. There seems to be this old policy where we respond to calls in the city with our equipment, and then there's just this duplication type of thing. So, recommendations, they really feel that we need to improve communications. I think you could have talked to anyone, including the board, and anyone would have said that. So that was not a aha. Maybe take a look at a joint strategic or master plan, and also talk about capital planning. Then they also talk about how the organizational structure is flawed. And so it's not just where the chief's reporting to, but for example, if we have volunteers acting outside their scope or abilities, it's likely that there could be a legal concern as to which organization is actually liable for that type of situation. Different organizational expectations and operational expectations. So they kind of then pared it down to say, okay, there's 5 potential types of directions you could go. So the first one is status quo. They're not recommending that. The quote from here is financially, operationally, administratively, the status quo option appears to be less favorable than other potential choices. For the chief and I, we're not in favor of this. Not having clarity in the roles, it's hurting the relationship, and just, so that's one of the reasons we just don't think the status quo is working very well. The next option they talk about is if we were to essentially still provide the same type of services. So anyone looking at this, nothing would change, but instead we're contracting with them. So that way the chief's not reporting to 2 different bosses, And in the contract, which would take some time and work to figure out, we would lay out, what do we charge per call? What is that based on? And, you know, is it, here's gonna be the rates that we pay volunteers, here's gonna be the overhead. Like, all of that needs to be worked out. We'd also have to work out, how are they gonna measure if we're meeting expectations or not, type of situation. So all of that's gonna require a lot of conversations to make sure, but essentially then we'd still respond to the same area and it would still be our volunteers, but we're not having to do two different apparatus and we're not, it's just gonna be this number of calls we're responding to and, you know, that kind of stuff type of thing. So, this, that per here, it says appears to be the most feasible and it would look most identical to the status quo. It maintains the same level of service. Another pro is it cleans up the reporting conflict. It clears up the language on deliverables and costs. The con is it will take time and work to discuss the structure of the contract. So the chief and I feel like this is an okay option if the county is open to it as well. And I want to be clear of why we're choosing this language is clearly this is a discussion with this board and they're going to have their feedback and their ideas and their concerns on any of these type of things. So what we want to make clear is we're not here to force anything or anything like that, but we need to know what council's comfortable with so then we can go have those conversations. So if there's some we don't want to have anything to do with, we need to know that. And if there's some that we're open to, then that's where we can hope the discussion starts focusing on. So this is one of the options we feel that we hope council would be comfortable with. The third area is, you know, the area that we currently have as a response, that we pull that out and that we set it up as its own district. So that would cover the city and the southern part of Alamosa. We would need to go to the voters in two different ways. We would need to, one, split that unincorporated out of their area. And then voters would have to approve the new area that comes with a mill levy type of situation. Now, the con is for the county, East Alamosa is the biggest area for their mill levy that's supporting the rest of it. So it could be harmful to their finances if it's not done correctly. It does clean up the issue that they thought was a big deal, where one part of the county is getting medical first response and the other part isn't. So it clears that up. It's going to require, like, this is probably 3 or 4 years type of work, type of situation. If you think through to our street sales tax, that was cakewalk compared to what something like this would be, type of thing. A lot of public education, a lot of outreach. It's a lot. And we would probably need to hire a consultant to run what does the mill levy need to be? What's the operational cost going to be? You need to pay for the elections, all of that kind of stuff. At this point, we're not really recommending this option because it's a huge undertaking and we don't want to do anything that's going to hurt the county either, type of thing from a financial perspective. So one of the other options is then our fire department ceases to exist and the county board just provides services for the whole thing. We're not in favor of this option. Based out of here, it says this alternative would not make much sense operationally, financially, or administratively, unless the Alamosa County Fire Protection District is willing to raise the mill levy to provide a more organized level of service. I'm just going to go to the next one. Then the next one is if we just say, okay, you have the mill levy for these areas. You provide the support to fire response for unincorporated area, and the city's fire department will focus within city limits. So they get to keep all their mill levy and nothing's hurt there. They have complete control over what's going on. They don't have to be like, it's not our chief or anything like that type of thing. What's said in here is it says this would give the district direct control over the level of services provided. as well as more power to change that service that they may not currently have. Another positive is we keep the same level of service within city limits. There's no disruption there. It potentially could reduce our call volume since we're not having to respond to calls in East Alamosa or out in the county. That could help us a little bit from a volunteer perspective. It addresses the issues of the duplicate apparatus. It could, though, as a con, potentially add cost to the county to ensure the volunteer coverage. Like, where are they gonna store their things? Do they need to beef up more? Do they need to have a second chief for down in this area? There could be a lot more that they're gonna have to think through type of thing. It's pretty simple for us. It's a much more complicated and potentially costly thing for them. But for us, we feel like this is an okay option if it's one they want to talk seriously about as well. So those are the different scenarios. Let me see if there's anything else really. No. So the rest of the bullets aren't really worse.
So if the board, so obviously it sounds like there's two that obviously rise to the top, the one
For
that,
us,
yes. And so with that, so obviously it was that second one, but if, let's say they start stopping or not wanting to do that, then is it something we'd say, well, then let's just go to number 5 and separate?
that can be, yes,
And so obviously we want to be probably good,
yes.
stewards and all of that. But at the same time, if they're really not willing to come to the table to try to work.
And I think the other part, and this is kind of goes back to the disclaimer, is I don't interact with the volunteers as much, and Bill's, almost 2 years, but like new as well. And so there can be, not having processed this with the firefighters, there may be a strong sense of ownership that our own volunteers feel from a response perspective. And so I kind of go back to that too, because I want to make sure we know that even our own firefighters could have some different opinions.
And I think it's important.
Yeah.
Before or I personally would want to make a total weigh-in.
Yeah. Is that fair?
That's very,
Okay.
yeah, they would like a voice in this.
Yes.
They are super dedicated. They've been serving the county for years and certainly looking over these, and we'll have some meetings on this and
Yeah.
try to get a strong pulse on which direction they're leaning towards, and then share that and put it all together and see where the county's at. And hopefully we can have some really positive interactions and make a decision.
Well, looking forward, looking over the choices that you have here, the first and the last one fit right now for this scenario. But if you were to take the city and look ahead 20 years, which one falls better for it? I mean, I think we have to look at that. We have massive growth coming and south the city, and who knows what is going to happen in the next 10 years, for housing development and things of that nature. So keeping that area of growth in mind, which one would be a better fit, I guess? Or is one better that we can tweak as it moves?
I feel like the two we're comfortable with both can work.
Okay.
For as we grow. But what I will tell you is the other thing we will still need to have conversations about is evaluating if we need to look at a combo department, type of thing. And either one can work with that as well, but going to a combo is going to require funding from somewhere. Type of thing, because we're still waiting to try to add the 1 FTE for police. Adding 10 is like, that is not something that can happen. So if that is something that is in our future, 2, 5, whatever that is, if that's in our future, you almost start to wonder if creating the district would make sense and to roll all of that up into one thing. Do you disagree? Because now would be the time to disagree.
I'll say this quite often, and it's been shown in California, Arizona, different places. A lot of little departments combined don't have the buying power of one big department. The organization and structure and rules and regulations and policies of one larger department that you look at like Cal Fire, for instance, if you know much about California, Cal Fire has taken over a lot of different counties and cities. So there is value to that when you're looking at a real big picture from a 30,000-foot view. So I think that's the main point I want to get across is having a bunch of small departments operating differently, it's more costly as well. So
What does this, board want?
We don't know. So they don't do things, they don't communicate outside the meetings. So that's the email I sent you where they have their board meeting where they're gonna ask questions of the consultant, type of thing. The relationship between us and the board is not very good. I think there's a lot of, I think they probably have a lot of fear. I think in their mind, that the city's always wanting something or is gonna push something or things like that, which is why we really wanted to be careful with how we worded things tonight. So I don't know, they haven't had that discussion yet. So the meeting next week, they're gonna be asking their questions. Maybe they'll start processing on that. But what I'd like to do is, like, get an idea of where you guys are comfortable, and then maybe if there's a council person to work with the chief and I to have those conversations. And then Jamie had his.
They have their own volunteers too, right?
that's correct.
I just keep going back to what we were discussing earlier about the guys who are really showing up to these calls. Have they tried to organize any kind of infrastructure on their own, like breakout sessions on what they can do better, or is it just the board who's calling the shots on?
Are you speaking about Moscow Hooper
Yeah,
Fire?
So they have a chief, and then he manages the volunteers. I don't think they feel like they have to do, that there is any improvement needed.
but there is apparently, right?
I
From a
would,
legal aspect,
Yes.
going to medicals and not being medically trained, that's a liability that we may be incurring, being a part of that district. And that was pointed out, and that's documented here, and that's one of the things that the study organizer noted and brought up several times.
and they've talked about it and they're not gonna change.
So they're aware of it and they're still,
Correct.
Wait,
You had your hand.
Sure. Okay, I will cut it back. So with the contract for service option, basically, whenever you go out on call, you would send like an invoice at some point of time for the amount of calls that the city responded to.
Much like what we do now, once a month, we tally up all of our calls. And I send that to their accountant, and then our firefighters get paid for responding outside of the city limits.
So kind of, and we may also need to meld other stuff into it though. So when we look at our contract with Monta Vista, it's a little bit easier because it's not, it's predictable work. We've got 3 FTEs, here's what they get paid, here's the percentage. Yeah. So it has some of that percentage set in, but then it also talks a little bit about overhead or things like that too, and things. So it's not only just the calls, but we'll have to lay out what's the expectation of when it's time to replace an apparatus? What's that cost share gonna be? And then, and that kind of stuff, and what's the bunker gear, and so we're gonna have to lay out what we think, and some of that might be, let's look at the call volume. How much is it within city limits? How much of it has traditionally been? And then maybe that's the percentage we apply to some of those things. So we're gonna have to work through those things. And I feel like out of fairness to them, we need to make sure we're clear on how can they communicate if they think there needs to be changes. So they're not going to be as much in the weeds, right? Because that's why we're clearing up. They're not supervising Bill, so they're not as much in the weeds. But how do we measure if this contract is satisfactorily performed or not? And what does that look like too?
In doing so, it sounds like that may free up the potential liability concerns.
Yes.
As well, like Chief just mentioned. And then the last thing I wanted to just clarify, when it comes to the equipment that's housed in the city, would that give you more control of having access to all of the equipment when you go out on county calls, or do you still have to determine if you're gonna use county material?
No, so it would just be our apparatus. Now, we'd have to figure out whose is whose and, you know, and give them theirs and do we have what we need? But then when we respond with our equipment type of thing. We don't have to have duplicate equipment anymore.
There's a lot of equipment that we both went in on. So there might be
There's
two of those.
untangling.
So, yeah, there'll be an extensive attempt to untangle and decide who actually gets it. And then how do you determine a value? Do we both agree that value of this vehicle is X amount? And if so, this one's at this amount and then swap. So that will be a tricky thing. The other thing is if we did just use city vehicles and all the vehicles that we had and that are housed here were city-owned vehicles, then if we're going outside of the city to a call, quite often, in other places, they will charge miles. Because wear and tear on those heavy rigs, on the brakes, on the tires, then we can then pay for those through the city shops who services our vehicles. But that too is just another layer of the onion of many things that will have to be looked at and a price point put on each of those.
If it's okay with council, I wouldn't mind.
And being like working with us to have those conversations, that would be great.
Is this the norm, like to have it where a fire chief would have two bosses like this?
No, it is.
Yeah, and so for me, I think whenever you look as that contract I did really made sense to me because honestly, I don't ever feel anybody should have that where you're answering to two different people and with especially two different mindsets. So.
That is probably the foundation of the communication.
Yeah.
Concerns that were brought up over and over. You look in the military, there's always one person
Right.
that's not to because things get messed up. So
And I was gonna say, even in California, so where I'm from, our two towns, we were called the Twin Cities. Because the two towns were run, or two cities were run separate, but when it came to police and fire and all of that, again, having one, again, that taxes, but coming together so that it was stronger.
yeah,
Okay, I got a few questions. This is, I've been here for 10, 11 years and we've never talked about this fire. Is I need better understanding of two bosses. Like, does this other group pay you?
yes, I get a stipend from the county
All right. And then,
to oversee calls in the county portion of which they don't respond or they can't respond because they're too far away.
so scenario, there's a fire out in East Alamosa. We respond to it, you guys respond to it. Take care of the fire, it's done. You have, taken record of how much you use, the equipment and wear and tear, all this stuff.
Is this a scenario under our current or under?
Under current,
Under current, okay.
Correct. And so you said once a month you send this bill, does that go to the fire district or to the county?
It goes to the Alamosa County Fire Protection District.
And they are separate from the county.
And their money comes from the mill levy.
Correct.
Their own mill levy that the voters voted on that goes directly to the fire district.
So it doesn't go to the county, then to the fire
I don't
district.
know who collects it, but the levy is their levy and their board is elected directly from, voters in the county.
Similar to the marketing board and the tourism board, where there's a certain, well, I meant a certain tax, I guess, that goes straight to.
Yeah, but then they're appointed by the commissioners.
Yeah.
They're,
I guess I was talking about.
Commissioners have any say on this board?
No, this is an independent, it's a fire district, so they're their own.
legal.
Who votes them in?
The county voters. like,
So they're actually running, they're running,
Like the mosquito.
it's like a mosquito controls, the closer comparative I would say it is. They're their own legal board, they cover a certain geographic area, there's a mill levy that pays for their service.
Okay, and then, so, I know you answered this already, but I'm just trying to understand, if there's a fire in Estrella and you guys have to go and respond to that.
Yes,
Okay, if there's a fire in Moscow Hooper, they respond to it first?
they respond to it, and that's their backyard. If they call for help, mutual aid, then we'll go on up there. Otherwise,
Like
they
we can
got,
call for mutual.
Okay, and then so, when you tell me about how at each firehouse, there's a county truck and a city truck, or whatever, for lack of better terms. Isn't that like response time and you gotta get there and you're trying to figure out, well, if I should I use the county or the city truck or whatever? Is that a big deal or not?
as the guys who've been here a long time, it's not such a big deal. Maybe for somebody who's new, but as a engineer, a driver, somebody who operates that vehicle, typically, in the fire world, one or two rigs, and you've got to master, because all the pump panels are a little bit different. So you throw in 3 different rigs with different pump panels, or tool selection, where those tools are located, or some of the nuances of the operation of that vehicle, that's where you get a little stall or a gap in the process of responding.
And it is an unneeded duplication from a resource
It's-
perspective.
It's a great expense as well, because every year they have to get tested. They get tires and brakes, they get a thorough checkout, oil change, you name it. It's the maintenance of a big beast of a vehicle. And that was one of the first things that Jason Fuller said, he came in here, is, you got too many rigs. And I agree, it's a lot to keep care of, but it's part of the system that was working before.
Do I pay, I should know this, but do I pay my taxes as part of that go to the mill levy?
It's unincorporated county. Is where the mill levy is, heads.
Quick question, I'm new, so forgive me if I'm trying to get up to speed, on this or that. It's kind of confusing. From my understanding, we have a board or an entity who can't do, I don't know if I can say this, but can't do the job how they want to do it. We come in and assist them, right?
No, I think it was an efficiency. So they have a fire station at the Moscow Hooper area. Do they have 2
Yes,
stations?
we have 2.
They have 2 stations, and so they have apparatus, they have the ability to respond with volunteers and all of that. And I think there's a point in time of who's gonna respond south of Stanley, because the response time from that station down to here. So it was, well, we're here, and again, this is 50 or more years ago, so I don't know the exact conversation, but it was, let's have this relationship to where then if you responded out in the county, because you're here, then this is how we'll pay for it, type of thing.
So it sounds like it just needs to be revisited
Right.
and.
And a lot of it's been handshake or really old agreements that may not work.
yeah,
Yeah.
and what's the smartest way to
To
do,
do it.
especially if everybody's growing.
But wouldn't offsetting equipment help fill even a PT just to get the data that you need? I mean, it sounds to me like the lack of data on some of this is important. If you have it, right?
Give me an example.
So you were saying
So if we
you
had,
reached out to them for something and you couldn't get it, right? There's the structures, nobody has.
We're talking about the state patrol.
Yeah.
yeah, so
I-
the data, state patrol's separate from all of that. So for me, if we were gonna look at going to a combo department, I'd want us to really take a look at our response times. And I'd want us to take a look at, that trending stuff, the volunteers, how many are actually showing up, like digging into that, because it will cost money and we'll have to make a case to the voters type of thing. So we will need that kind of data to make the case.
And you mentioned you reached out for something and you didn't get it, right?
Well, I think I was speaking about dispatch. Sometimes we'll ask, as we're en route, do you have an update? And because they're so busy over there, they don't always have the time to extract that information from the call. So that was the example I was giving you, not being like,
Yeah, I understand the paper showcase, but I think earlier when we started, there was something that you requested, I think it was from.
So like an example I gave of how we work differently is I gave the example of where Bill sent the draft request for proposal to him and said, hey, let me know if you want me to change the wording. He never heard back.
Yeah, so that,
So then
that's
we
very
sent it
important.
out.
Yeah, that.
yes, and it, when I came here, I wasn't aware of all these historical nuances.
No.
And so I think that's why the phrase communication was in here so much, because my predecessor had been here 39 years. His rapport with them, he knew, they knew, you know, they was very comfortable, you know, from me looking out at it, is, yeah, they knew what each other wanted and at what time frame they were probably gonna get it. So I come in new and I'm like, yeah, I'm saying this to you, and then crickets, nothing. So it's not that it was bad, it was just a norm that I was not aware of.
So
And so you pile that times other opportunities for communication, and I'm thinking one thing and they're thinking another. And it's not because either one's bad or wrong, it's just two different shifts.
And so they made it very clear. So they are a board and obviously there's all the open records and open meetings. They have all the same laws that you guys have. So they meet once a month and they don't even read things in between those meetings. And so now we know that, like now
Are they paid?
I don't know. So, but now we know that. So when Bill needs them to review something, he doesn't send it to them in an email. He just takes it to the next meeting. And then we can also plan out how long something's gonna take, knowing that we have to hit this meeting or things like that versus he's hired and he's emailing me and I'm emailing him back the same day. And it's an entirely different operation type of situation.
That doesn't sound efficient.
No.
I mean, it just seems like now you got to schedule to make.
I feel like email, I guess my question is, why can't we say email?
Yeah.
Somebody says emails.
Get with the times.
Yeah,
I just wanted to make
And
sure.
that's why I asked if they're paid.
Like they're saying,
It's just a different way of doing things.
Yeah,
And,
So they need homing pigeons too, no?
well, I understand you got to make things efficient, but it's frustrating to have to wait. What are these monthly ones?
this was,
Be there.
this was supposed to be a 3-month study,
Yeah,
just say that.
okay, I understand. Thank you. I understand.
If we're doing something and they really feel like it works for them, and when we were doing things differently, it pushed up against
comparing the two options, the contract services versus the, they do county and we do just the city. Is that just the second one, is that just a slightly variation of that? Like we cover just the city, but if they need us for backup, we would go.
them. We would do
contract
mutual
out.
aid.
Okay,
It would be covered under standard mutual aid.
okay,
perspective.
gotcha.
Yeah, but like right now, we're doing out of recall type of thing.
Similar to police where there's mutual aid sometimes.
Okay. And I guess my main concern is the lack of structure around hundreds of thousands of dollars that are sitting there about being able to schedule out purchases that you know, timely maintenance, things of that nature. So, yeah, that's, okay. So what are you looking for from us? The, like a general direction?
Where do you guys feel like where we say we're comfortable with these two and we're not comfortable with those two? Is there anyone that disagrees with that?
No, I agree with your recommendations, kind of the two options where you're comfortable. I think with the growth that's about to happen now, also especially in the southeast, southwest corner of the city limits, that we're gonna have to eventually go to that combo situation. And that when we get to that point, we're gonna have to, because we can't afford it, we're gonna have to do a really good job like we did with the city street tax of communicating. However, we have goals for that money, if it's a sales tax, I don't even know the options, but whatever that looks like, we have to really, really communicate the data. These calls and population growth and all this stuff. That's right.
And to show it's finding in my history. Especially.
Let's see, in addition to that, refresh me on what you just said real quick.
That I personally would be in favor of combo situation.
Okay,
And also looking ahead, so when you're saying combo, that obviously looking ahead that we're gonna have to hire.
They're aware, right, everyone's aware that growth is happening, and this is, it doesn't just mean where the borders are now, that this plan fixes. I mean, that's a lot of work,
to launch that, I think we need trigger points that start to initiate that process.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just ideal
Mhm.
verbiage about, well, yeah, if we hit 300 calls, we're gonna go to, well, we did that 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So I think we need to develop trigger points at which point we then take a step into there and start educating and bringing up stats and then making it happen.
Whichever
Otherwise,
way is decided, I think without a doubt, so I'm supportive also of directions. But I think it needs to be made really clear to the board and stuff, is that, you know, unfortunately, we're in this day and age now that there has to be contracts. There has to be, you know, policies, contracts, plans, all of that. So whichever direction, so also that they know that that's actually not on the table as a choice in regards to that. There's going to be some structure, it's how to put it together.
And I just think, knowing that there may be concerns that if we have ulterior motives, or if we're gonna try to take something or things like that, I think the more we can emphasize that we are not out to get anything, we want what's best for both organizations. We just want that clarity, and we wanna work with them on figuring out what makes the most sense. Because I think there is a significant sensitivity out there about that.
And I want to just reiterate what Charlie Gregor used to say all the time when we did talk about fire, that we have been always a really good partner with all entities across the valley, especially if we're even closer to home. I don't want to completely cut them off. But clear, like you said, was cleaning up the language in the contract.
So if it's needed and if people are okay, I'm willing to be tied back up. So, you know, that's, and if, yeah.
Growth is here, and we need to put the steps into place to be ready for it when it happens. And this is just generally, this is outside this conversation. Do you see a secondary fire station for Alamosa heading 20, 25 years down the road?
We do have two already.
Okay.
We've got this one, and then we have one that's off of Craft. Hill.
Okay, so it's over by that, the development.
Yeah. So, but beyond that, you know, I don't know what your answer would be beyond.
it's based on response times to population and if there's a mass growth coming within a certain period of time, a lot of times big developers will buy the lot or they'll buy an engine or something. I'm not suggesting that you try to extract that from developers, but often that's what happens. They'll just get ahead of, you know, massive growth where they're putting in thousands of homes. So I don't know that we're at that point yet, but sure, with road, yeah, station one, it's gonna take us too long to get somewhere, you know, we gotta be there in 5 minutes. So if we're beyond that, we're not close enough, then we might build a station out there. We also track where all the calls come in. So we got a large population of calls near the station. If there's a large population of calls outside of the station, out of limits, then we might want to reinforce that there. There's a lot of strategic ways to design that, but that's yet to come.
And who has the airport? Do they answer the calls to the airport?
The airport has their ARF squad,
Okay.
air rescue firefighters, so they're trained in that capacity. 5 of our firefighters are trained in that capacity as well. If they need help, they will call us and we will respond.
I would say also, I guess I would add when we were talking about the legal aspect of obviously injury and things like that, I think that in this day and age, we've seen it obviously with the police and then obviously seen what happened to the paramedics up in Denver, so that whole situation. And obviously, we're not saying it's identical, but I think that, right,
Liability issue.
liability, like the Denver with the was it paramedics that did the shot? And there's learning, yeah. So I guess my thing being is more just, we're in a day and age where I feel like we can say how, but it tends to be a little bit more lawsuit happy. And that idea of liability and looking, and there's a lot of lawyers out there really pushing for that.
Yeah.
So with that, I think we're in that time that this is vital as well. Okay, thanks. You were looking at.
So you go all the way west to the Rio Grande County one?
Yes.
And then just east.
And just so you know, I wasn't trying to say that was right or wrong. I guess that was the more publicized one. I was more just saying with more things like that. So not trying to pass judgment one way or the other.
And either of the options will take, that will help take pressure off the chief as well, to be back and move one person instead of two. And all the policies and procedures in place that say nothing to do with each other, so, yeah. Okay.
This went a lot faster. I am losing my touch on predicting time. Any other questions?
Oh,
Go ahead.
I'm curious, it's more of a financial question. Like the EMT program or any colleges help assist with placing some of these people. I mean, it sounds to me like there should be more of a trend of collaboration, kind of like the first responders team, you know, like this could look different with firefighters, but I know a lot of kids want to be firefighters. I know kids that are studying to be EMTs. But what does cross collaboration look like in the future? Do any of like riding along, like the liability thing to have somebody certified who
What's tough about a volunteer department is you don't always have somebody here to give them a ride or to sign up for a ride along program. A lot of times in the bigger municipalities, you'll go to a fire station and it's a real busy house and 10 minutes later, you're running a call. Here, it could, you know, we average 1 point something calls per day. So you might be sitting around a while and there's a liability aspect, but there's always waivers if that were a choice. I think if I could clarify what you're asking, is there more of an avenue for people to get involved in the fire service here?
like an EMT?
So can I share, because I actually have more information I haven't told you yet. So I've been actually we've been working together and with Paul with Trinidad to actually do a 4-year degree that will, and Trinidad would cover the fire side. And then, because we have a lot of students who come to Addison as athletes that want to be firefighters. By the time they really tell us, it's almost too late, so it's too late for it to be worthwhile to be a volunteer. But this could actually be a recruiting tool that will help actually get firefighters here. So Trinidad is actually on board. We had our meeting last week, so I was gonna set up a meeting. They're on board to potentially add the firefighting part to their school.
And I don't know, Jamie, if you're asking it from that perspective, but because you're talking about EMT. So for 10 years when I was with Cape Girardeau, they have a full staffed fire department. And some of the biggest stuff we had to debate is, do they do medical first response or not? Because that starts to become the bigger chunk of your type of calls. So you're running these big rigs to a medical call type of thing. And then when they have to be EMT certified, and then you get into different levels of paramedic, and then you get into pay issues, and then attraction from a workforce perspective, and all of that. So there's reasons why some departments obviously do some of that combination of first response EMT with their fire. Even some of the metro areas here, so there's probably some synergies, but I will also say it's a very complex thing to enter into lightly. So I don't know if you're thinking bringing more EMT into our fire response.
I see it, and the money, the financial backing obviously isn't there for fire departments. It's never really a customer. You always hear volunteer fire departments, and the amount of youth who really still want to be a part of this, knowing this is just, I feel like there should be more of it. And
Okay, so you
with my-
were asking for that.
Yeah, so, but the other question is, where does the ambulance, like, comparing that and time, like, where does that fit in? If there's a liability with fire departments,
So the ambulance is its own district.
are they always last there, or I just?
So the ambulance is its own district and they're housed out of the hospital. And so that's why for the area, our fire responses, they're like, that is a quick response because they're housed there. But when you look at having to go all the way up to Moscow Hooper, that's why they feel it's important for them to provide the medical first response because they're getting there before the ambulance can get there. And so that's their philosophical stuff they have to weigh, because if they're getting there 5 or 10 minutes early, and that could be the difference between saving a life versus the liability of not having EMTs and requiring that. Like there's things they need to parse through that isn't an issue we've had to do because the ambulance is that we haven't seen a need to be the first response.
Yes. There's fire-based EMS, where firefighters are all EMTs or paramedics, and we could do it all and transport. It's very expensive. You need medical patrol, qualifications. It gets really deep and very expensive quickly. Having an ambulance district who's doing well with it, it doesn't really point that we need fire-based EMS now, but there may come a time, but I'll probably be 90 years old, so anyway, there's fire-based EMS, and we do not practice that in Alamosa, but we do have EMTs, but they don't get compensated for that qualification. We do have paramedics, but they don't get compensated for that because they work within other entities, ambulance services, or other fire
They
departments.
happen to be paramedics, they happen to be EMTs, but when they're working with us, they're only working with us as firefighters.
So I guess my question was from like a liability commenter here, where you have people. Is that how it was said?
We don't.
Whoever has, is there a possibility that some people,
But when they're doing that up at Moscow Cooper, and if they move someone the
Yeah.
wrong way, there could be issues there.
If you practice with outside of the scope of your training, then you're opening yourself up to a liability.
which is liability on?
And we're part of that
We
organization.
could fight it, but since we are kind of part of it, like Bill and the volunteers respond outside, and we don't have that clear contract, it would have to be something we would have to argue.
There,
Yes.
I just want to make sure I understood that. Okay, thank you.
And what was the timeline again for the two choices?
No timeline.
Okay,
If they
well,
meet.
you said some was a couple of years.
Oh,
That kind of thing.
So if we're gonna look at creating a district, that's probably a 3-year type of process. That's just an estimate because of the amount of work, conversations, all of that kind of stuff. But that wasn't one of the options we were recommending.
But contract services and we just do city and then they do the county, that could be something, that transition less than a year.
It all depends on what the opinions and thoughts are of the district, the county board.
Okay.
It depends on how often they can meet with us, type of thing and that kind of stuff. So it still could be like a year process.
What if they say no? What if you take, they hear it all and you say, here are 2 things and let's have a discussion. And they go, now we're good.
And we'll probably need to have an executive session with Eric.
Okay.
Everybody good? Everybody?
Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
But it will be great to hear what the volunteers and stuff think as well.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's.
And then it was more banging in there, I can only imagine coming in and doing it, so.
Thank you all. Good question there, but.